All right, welcome back, Focus Learners, to another explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating intersection of technology, philosophy, and human existence. Based on a deeply thought-provoking interview with mathematician and philosopher John Lennox, we are exploring the existential debate surrounding artificial intelligence and human purpose. We're looking at how the race to build super intelligent machines is actually forcing us to ask some of the absolute oldest, hardest questions about what it really means to be human. Okay, let's dive into this. A former Google engineer recently shared this startling quote, and man, it sets the immediate, incredibly high stakes of the AI conversation we're having today. When we talk about AI right now, we aren't just talking about a better search engine or a cool algorithm anymore. We are talking about the creation of an entity so vastly superior in intellect that some of its very own creators are beginning to use literal theological language to describe it. Crazy, right? So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the AI revolution, move into creating a machine god, look at simulation versus consciousness, explore science, reductionism, and meaning, break down the cookbook analogy, and finally, we'll wrap up with suffering and human purpose. Let's jump right into Section 1, the AI revolution. So, the source material draws a really critical distinction between narrow AI and AGI. Narrow AI is the stuff we use every single day, right? It solves specific problems, like diagnosing lung cancer from a scan or picking a specific face out of a massive crowd. But tech companies, they're actually racing toward artificial general intelligence, or AGI. AGI would be a machine capable of doing literally any intellectual task a human can do. Imagine a system that essentially holds a PhD in absolutely everything, operating at lightning speed. Lennox identifies this specific pursuit as the primary driver behind our current existential panic. And this brilliantly illustrates a core concept. Lennox compares AI to a very sharp knife. It's an amoral tool. On one hand, you've got immensely beneficial uses, like surgery, advancing medical diagnoses, or spotting a terrorist in a crowded stadium to save lives. But on the exact same token, on the other hand, you have the devastating potential for murder, like authoritarian regimes using it for massive totalitarian control or suppressing minorities through vast social credit systems. The technology itself doesn't have a moral compass, It just amplifies human intent. Which brings us to Section 2, creating a machine god. The source notes a really fascinating and growing trend of anthropomorphizing AI, basically treating these machines as if they are conscious beings. And this quote from OpenAI's Sam Altman is incredibly revealing about the culture actually building these systems. Because AI appears omniscient, it knows all the data on the internet, and omnipresent, some people are literally already forming worship groups around it. They're looking to technology to fill a space that historically was strictly reserved for religion. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how it contrasts two entirely opposite worldviews discussed in the interview. Over on the left, we have transhumanism, which is heavily championed by thinkers like the historian Yuval Noah Harari. This is the homo deus concept, the idea that humans are going to use bioengineering and AI to literally upgrade themselves into gods, solving physical death purely as a technical glitch. But on the right, the source contrasts this with the Christian narrative, the belief in a God who stepped down to become human in order to freely give life. So it's this incredibly stark contrast, right? Humans reaching up to become machines versus a creator stepping down to meet humanity. Moving on to Section 3, simulation versus consciousness. Lennox makes a really crucial argument here, and it's one we can't miss. AI is a machine. It is not a being. It can simulate intelligence flawlessly, sure, but it completely lacks what philosophers call qualia. Qualia is the actual conscious experience of a thing, like truly experiencing the redness of a red apple, or actually feeling the weight of grief. Actually, the developers themselves have zero scientific consensus on what consciousness even is. Therefore, Lennox warns that we deeply demean our own supreme human dignity when we reduce ourselves to mere biological machines, forgetting that humans uniquely connect actual lived consciousness with intelligence. And this forces us to pause and ask a huge question. If a machine can flawlessly simulate human intelligence and even vastly outpace it, what happens to human identity and purpose? Think about it. If our value is just tied to our intellectual output, we are in serious trouble. This widening gap between technological capabilities and our own internal search for meaning is exactly why people are asking these deeper questions today. Let's look at Section 4, science, reductionism, and meaning. To explain this search for meaning, the source draws on Dr. Ian McGilchrist's fascinating work on human cognition. Historically, our society has hyper-focused on the left brain, this narrow, rationalist, hyper-reductionist way of seeing the world. And hey, that is fantastic for building microchips. But we've severely neglected the right brain, the side that grasps the big picture, context, beauty, and religion. As a result, we've created this modern world where we understand perfectly how everything works mechanically, but we often completely lack the context to understand what any of it actually means. Lennox actually pushes this critique of scientific reductionism even further, addressing atheism directly. He argues that reducing human thought purely to physics and chemistry ultimately undermines the very rationality you need to perform science in the first place. His logic goes like this. If your brain is solely the end product of a completely mindless, unguided process, well, why on earth would you trust the thoughts it produces? He points out that no scientist would ever trust a computer if they knew it was built by a random, unguided process. So how do we find meaning that we can actually trust? Lennox uses what he calls the red Ferrari analogy. If someone tells you there's a brand new red Ferrari parked outside just for you, you can't prove or disprove it by sitting in a room and endlessly arguing about it. You literally have to step outside and look. He uses this to illustrate his stance that faith, much like a scientific observation or, say, trusting a spouse of 58 years, absolutely must be evidence-based and requires taking an active step of exploration to verify. Section 5. The cookbook analogy. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this next part is brilliant. Imagine you marry someone, right? And on day one, you hand them a thick, expensive cookbook. You tell them, okay, follow the rules for making the apple cake on page 152 perfectly. If you keep these rules for 40 years, then I'll accept you as my spouse. Otherwise, you're out. It sounds completely absurd. Literally no human relationship works on a merit-based, rigorous, rule-keeping scale like that. But Lennox points out that many people viewed religion exactly like that cookbook. It's just a giant cosmic scale weighing your good deeds against your bad deeds in hopes of eventually earning acceptance. He impartially contrasts these merit-based views with his own understanding of the Christian faith. In his view, a true relationship starts with grace and acceptance granted at the very beginning of the journey, and that acceptance is what frees the person to actually live well, rather than sweating through life in fear of some ultimate cosmic performance review. Finally, Section 6, Suffering and Human Purpose. Now, Lennox approaches this next part as a mathematician, and he readily acknowledges that the problem of suffering, like a child born with a devastating illness, is incredibly hard to solve. There's no easy math here. He calls our reality a world of beauty and barbed wire. It is this deeply mixed picture of immense, breathtaking wonder right alongside tragic, heartbreaking suffering. He demands that absolutely every single worldview, whether it's atheistic, transhumanist, or religious, must honestly grapple with this barbed wire reality. You can't just ignore it. For Lennox, his ultimate answer to this immense problem isn't found in some clever philosophical loophole. Instead, he finds it in the Christian narrative, which presents a God who does not remain a safe, distant observer of all that barbed wire. According to this worldview, God physically enters into the messy human condition, experiencing suffering and death directly. For Lennox, the idea of a creator who actually suffers alongside humanity provides the ultimate bedrock for trusting that there is a real purpose and an eventual restoration, even amidst our most profound pain. So the crucial point is this. We are living in a wild era where technology is rapidly evolving, with some folks literally racing to build what they're calling a machine god. But here's the thing. As these machines absolutely master the mechanics of intelligence, they cannot answer the fundamental questions of human consciousness, suffering, and meaning. We have to answer those for ourselves. So how are you actively exploring the evidence for meaning, truth, and grace in your own life? Don't let the machines do your thinking for you. Step outside, look for the evidence yourself, and keep exploring. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. And as always, keep learning.